As World War II commenced, Nazi Germany's military forces secured rapid and decisive victories. Through their strategy known as blitzkrieg, lightning warfare, the Wehrmacht advanced with unstoppable momentum, overwhelming Poland, Luxembourg, the Netherlands and France, in addition to Czechoslovakia, which had fallen before hostilities officially began. The experience of foreign military occupation remains among the most degrading and traumatic events a nation can endure. German forces and local populations found themselves in forced coexistence throughout occupied territories. Those who assisted the occupiers did so for varied reasons: dire necessity, basic survival during the occupation, or genuine ideological alignment with Nazi and fascist principles. However, following the Allied invasion at Normandy on June 6, 1944, liberation brought waves of retribution against collaborators that became intertwined with celebrations of freedom. This vengeance manifested as a volatile combination of hatred, bitterness, and long-suppressed desire for payback, resulting in punishments many viewed as brutal and disproportionate, a form of mob justice more characteristic of medieval society than the modern era. Women who engaged in romantic or intimate relationships with German soldiers, or merely socialized with them, faced accusations of horizontal collaboration, a French term describing sexual, romantic, or sentimental connections with occupiers. These women endured public humiliation through head shaving, a historically gendered punishment that stripped them of their femininity. The female body transformed into symbolic territory where issues of national identity and honor were contested. Women's bodies became ritualized battlegrounds where male victors demonstrated their triumph over other men. Understanding women's wartime conduct requires acknowledging survival as a primary motivating factor. Nevertheless, some women leveraged the occupation for personal gain, establishing relationships that provided economic advantages during widespread deprivation. Others served as paid informants sympathetic to Nazi-fascist ideology, sought positions of power, or even pursued revenge for pre-war injustices. Many women, despite existing engagements or marriages, faced the desperate necessity of supporting families after men departed for military service, sometimes resorting to relationships with occupiers or prostitution. In France, collaborating with Germans was perceived as renouncing French national identity, an act of treason. Historians document that collaboration included maintaining close relationships with Germans, providing services to them, sharing meals, socializing, and accompanying them publicly. Approximately 20,000 French women underwent public head shaving, though similar punishments occurred throughout Belgium, the Netherlands, and Italy between 1943 and 1945. Women accused of relationships with enemy soldiers were deemed traitors regardless of the nature of their interactions, subjected to having their heads shaved, being stripped naked, and enduring public humiliation. Public participation was essential to the punishment's effectiveness, marking women with swastikas and inscriptions like German whore symbolized the destruction of the transgressing body. These women violated not formal legal codes, but rather community moral standards. This ancient practice resurfaced throughout Europe during the political and military upheaval at war's end, with head-shaving punishments documented across France, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Yugoslavia, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. Photographs of these shaved women became enduring images in collective memory of the liberation period. Simone Touseau became France's most iconic representation of head-shaving punishment. Photojournalist Robert Capa captured her on August 16, 1944, in an image showing the young woman with a shaved head and swastika marked on her forehead, surrounded by a jeering crowd while clutching her infant, one of the so-called children of shame, or Nazi children. Life magazine published this photograph the following month, and it subsequently appeared in countless newspapers worldwide, making the shaved woman of Chartres internationally recognized. At age 23, during the German occupation, Touseau worked as an office employee for the German occupiers' interpreters. She supported Jacques Doriot's French Popular Party, which aligned most closely with Nazi ideology, but her primary transgression was maintaining a relationship with German soldier Erich Goss, aged 32, with whom she had a daughter. Goss loved Simone and wished to marry her, but the war separated them. He was deployed to the Russian front, while Simone spent 26 months imprisoned. The shaved women ultimately symbolized reclaimed masculinity and exposed the power dynamics between genders, men humiliated during wartime who failed to defend their nation. American feminist pioneer Katie Stanton wrote in 1868 about masculine destructiveness, "The male element embodies a destructive, determined, selfish, excessive force, a lover of war, violence, conquest and acquisition, generating discord, chaos, disease and death across both material and spiritual realms. History's pages overflow with blood and brutality." Europe's liberation represented a complicated period on the human level. Joy and excitement mingled with terror and grief. To solidify collective celebration, populations targeted women who had relationships with German soldiers, revealing humanity's darkest impulses. This revenge mechanism punished those who appeared publicly during wartime, displaying affection toward enemies. Presenting oneself with the enemy dissolved boundaries between public and private spheres, converting intimate relationships into political statements. Sexual relationships themselves weren't displayed, but their existence scandalized communities. Most women viewed these relationships as acts of indiscretion or even recklessness. The Netherlands called them Moffenmeiden, women associated with the enemy. Belgium labelled them Moffenhoren, German whores, and France termed them femmes à boche, Nazi women, all equally derogatory designations. Displaying shaved heads publicly became an act of derision and mockery before assembled populations. Shaving women demanded meticulous planning and coordination. While pre-liberation shearings occurred secretly, post-war collaborators were brought to public venues and exposed to crowds. This methodical, organizational aspect lent events an almost official character. Armed groups frequently violently extracted victims from their residences. Before assembled populations, victims' bodies underwent degrading treatment, head shaving, swastika markings, coating with tar and feathers. Women were compelled to walk naked through city streets amid mockery. Some suffered beatings or stoning, and in extreme cases, execution. Identical procedures occurred across villages throughout different territories. The populace served as direct judge, composed of resistance fighters alongside ordinary citizens, including women, men, children, and elderly individuals who accompanied the haircutters. Renowned designer Coco Chanel bore a significant stain on her otherwise impeccable reputation. She established intimate relations with German secret agent and Hitler confidant Baron Hans-Günther von Dinklage at the German embassy in Paris before the war, continuing them throughout occupation. They resided together in a luxurious Ritz hotel suite, and evidence suggests Coco possibly worked as a German spy. She expressed no remorse for collaborating with Germans. On the contrary, it provided substantial advantages. The Jewish Wertheimer family controlled 90% of Chanel perfume rights. Without their financial backing, Coco could never have initiated production, making Aryanization laws perfectly suited to her interests. After the Wertheimers fled France, Coco acquired the entire enterprise with Nazi assistance. How did Chanel fare following France's liberation? She skillfully protected herself. With her lover von Dinklage, she travelled to neutral Switzerland, remaining there safely until 1954. Only then did she undertake resurrecting her brand. Surprisingly, the Wertheimers themselves provided financial support. Italian women caught in relationships with German enemies faced similar treatment. The 1943-1945 period in Italy overflowed with tensions, escalations, attitudes, and individual choices that marked both fascists and anti-fascists. The war's final stages arrived with heavy emotional and psychological burdens that partially explain the violence erupting during liberation. Enraged populations sought revenge, determined to judge and punish those causing suffering throughout over 2 decades of dictatorship and eradicate fascism's evil from Italian society. Revenge acts appear in testimonies as necessary, almost national cleansing from which a country tormented too long by war could be reborn. Even within this collective atonement context, reflection on unjust practices targeting women accused of collaboration remains essential. Cases documented in Italy over decades prove insufficient for quantifying the phenomenon or enabling conclusive analysis, but they acquire significant historiographical value as exemplary testimonies documenting women's shearing as established practice. Italy's phenomenon paralleled France and other war-involved territories in its complexity and diversity, extending beyond the insurrectional phase through at least late 1945. Head-shaving victims weren't exclusively Republican fascists with precise documented offences. Women were punished merely for being wives, girlfriends, mothers, or lovers of Republican fascists and German or American soldiers. Italy's situation during those years demonstrated remarkable complexity. Mussolini exercised power from 1922 until July 25, 1943, when fascism fell. From that point, vendettas against women commenced, often regardless of militant fascism involvement, but simply for connections to fascists. Many harboured anti-fascist hatred exceeding 20 years. Germany transformed from Italy's ally to enemy. King Victor Emmanuel III appointed Marshal Pietro Badoglio as new government head, but Germans occupied Italy until American liberation. Many also considered Americans an occupying force. Fascism's end wasn't merely a few occupation years by foreign enemies, but the conclusion of over 2 decades of tyranny. Substantial anger and revenge thirst existed, understanding that barbaric, archaic shearing punishment often channeled anger constructively. Avoiding more serious violence by populations demanding vengeful actions proves appropriate and necessary. The Bergamo court ruling exemplifies this. In a trial against a partisan initiated by an actress whose hair was violently cut, judges acquitted the accused, declaring the haircut necessary for public order interests and protecting the unfortunate objects of popular hatred. For judges, shaving represented the lesser evil, an outrageous act exhausting the entire penalty without affecting inalienable or imprescriptible rights like life or bodily integrity. From celebrated, highly sought-after movie star to branded traitor, subsequently exiled and forgotten, a second-tier actress, mediocre in craft, but charming and beautiful beyond compare, attracted to power circles, victimized by tumultuous times. This described Lída Baarová, who died at 86 in 2000. Born Ludmila Babkova, the actress was daughter to a municipal official and opera singer. Both her mother and sister Zorka suffered from particular neurosis, reportedly manifested in other family members, and allegedly affected Baarová to lesser degree. Both sisters pursued entertainment careers. Zorka Janu, more mature with greater intellectual development and superior talent according to contemporary critics, saw her career marked by illness and ultimately committed suicide. Lída Baarová, after brief training at Prague's School of Performing Arts, rapidly ascended the film world. Her debut film was Fallen Patriots, directed by Miroslav Josef Krnjanski in 1932, when Babkova was merely 18. Between her debut and 1934, she participated in 19 Czechoslovak feature films, progressively gaining recognition and becoming a Czechoslovak cinema symbol. Her fame soon projected internationally. Indeed, Barcarol's success in 1935 earned American attention and even a Hollywood offer. Baarová, however, preferred continuing her career nearer her homeland. Here's a rephrased version of the text. Jarachwam moving to Nazi Germany. In 1936, Baarová relocated to Nazi Germany after signing with UFA, the Third Reich's premier film studio. There, amid romantic entanglements, including actor Gustav Fröhlich, she encountered Nazi propaganda minister and Hitler's right-hand man, Joseph Goebbels, with whom she also initiated an affair. What could have remained a brief liaison instead deeply penetrated the Nazi leader's heart through the Czech actress's charm. In subsequent statements and memoirs, Baarová claimed victimhood through her own naivete and insisted she acted in a completely apolitical fashion. The reality is that proximity to German power circles benefited her both personally and professionally. Even Adolf Hitler, a known cinema enthusiast, requested meeting her personally and offered her German citizenship. During this period, Baarová became identified with the Nazi regime, a perception that would exact heavy costs later, though she likely remained unaware. The Goebbels affair and political crisis, the tense atmosphere surrounding Baarová, commenced with her relationship with Goebbels, beginning in 1936, and as the relationship intensified, political tension strengthened. This relationship became so intense, it evolved into a political problem that Hitler himself eventually had to resolve. Goebbels was notorious for constant flirtations and affairs with young actresses, but in this instance, the relationship with Baarová exceeded his closest allies' expectations. The minister even submitted his resignation to Hitler, intending to depart for Japan as ambassador with his lover to start a new life. The Führer decided to intervene and expel the Czech actress from Germany. Goebbels' wife Magda also intervened decisively, and it's essential to recognize this occurred precisely when the Munich Agreement was being signed, surrendering part of Czechoslovakia to Germany. Hitler could not afford losing Joseph Goebbels at that crucial moment, much less permit international press reporting on an affair between his propaganda minister and a Czech actress. So they sent her back to her country. During this period, Baarová acted in 7 German-language films, speaking the language without accent. Some contained subtle Reich ideology propaganda such as Patriotin, Patriots, from 1937, in which she portrayed a French woman concealing a German spy in her house with whom she eventually falls in love. Return to the Protectorate. When Baarová returned to her homeland, it had transformed into a diminished puppet state, controlled by the Nazis, called the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. While prohibited from filming in Germany, initially no obstacles prevented her return to Prague sets, and she actively participated in the country's film production. In many ways, Baarová reproduced in Prague the same social lifestyle she enjoyed in Berlin, maintaining contacts and romantic relationships with the power elite, now comprising German officials and Czech collaborators. Again, her name carried a strong taste of betrayal. Her supposed naivete was rather cold calculation, because in Germany she had become accustomed to a certain living standard, a social standard specifically, and here she began exploiting arising opportunities. It's noteworthy that when the Protectorate was declared, Baarová already possessed extensive contacts with high-ranking officials. For example, she was known for her favourable disposition with Karl Hermann Frank, who held various power positions in the Protectorate and was sentenced to death in 1946 for war crimes. The actress promised Frank to remove the Czech suffix from her surname and call herself simply Baar to continue acting in German films. Engaging in collaborationism kept her afloat, but could not prevent some decline when, due to the war, national film production decreased. Precisely because of demand shortage at Barrandov Studios, Baarová obtained several theatre roles for the first time, performing on multiple occasions at the National Theatre stage, though with mixed results. Tracing her theatrical career proves difficult. She toured several stages, and her National Theatre arrival represented the peak of this Baarová facet. Contemporary reviews suggest she was generally well received, but her performance wasn't captivating or professional enough for theatre companies to compete over her. In Karel Jikinski's company, she acted as substitute for her sister Zorka, who possessed more stage talent than she did. She simply wasn't made for theatre. Italian escape and war's end. The increasing opportunity shortage in the Protectorate and final prohibition on Baarová acting in any Czech film led her in 1943 to seek fortune in Mussolini's Italy. During this initial Italian period, Baarová left her mark on the country's cinematography through 6 films shot between 1942 and 1944, again demonstrating her gift for languages. As one observer states, "I have had the opportunity to see 3 of these films. The first, La Fanciulla, is of average quality in her career, and relies like the others on Lída Baarová's acting in all her beauty. It's not a great performance, but it's admirable how well she spoke Italian, and also without an accent. Finally, the war's course made the Allies advance to Italy, opening a new front. Film production stopped, and Baarová had to return to Prague. Baarová's memoir book is titled Escapes, and Not by Chance. Shortly after returning to the Protectorate, World War II reached its final moments, and the power foundations that had supported the actress's career began crumbling. Fearing what might happen to her in a Prague returned to Czech hands, Baarová fled to Germany. She fled by car with actor Hans Albers, loaded everything that fit in the car, and headed to Bavaria. In the end, after a series of coincidences and circumstances, she fell into American hands and finally decided to simulate mental illness and was admitted to a psychiatric sanatorium in Munich. In September 1945, she was requested from Prague and immediately imprisoned in the Czechoslovak capital awaiting trial. Curiously, the charges didn't relate to her romantic relations with Nazi leaders like Goebbels, but stemmed from a spying accusation launched by her former friend and collaborator, theatre director Bohumil Perliček, involved during the Protectorate in a fraud crime. Perliček had been sent to prison partly thanks to Baarová's testimony, and now the complaint very likely stemmed from desire for revenge. Baarová was declared innocent and released in December 1946. Due to her involvement in the German film industry during occupation, she was banned for life from filming in Czechoslovakia and was fined, resulting in confiscation of the villa the actress owned in Prague. The former film star still faced many twists and turns. Shortly after leaving prison, she married Jan Kopecký, a puppet theatre owner and nephew of the communist interior minister, possibly also due to favourable treatment Baarová received for her collaborationist past. After a couple of years working with her husband as a puppeteer, the couple emigrated in 1948, the year of the communist regime's advent, to Austria. In this new exile life, Baarová resided in Argentina, Spain and Italy, managing to continue her acting career with the same or greater brilliance as in the interwar period. She managed to make a mark in 5 Italian films and Spanish films, that's admirable, adding another language to her repertoire, and appeared on theatre stages in Austria and several times in Germany. It can be said that her artistic life began after the war in the 1950s. In Spanish, Baarová shot 7 films in just 2 years, between 1956 and 1957. In 1956, she divorced Kopecký, and in 1970 married gynecologist Kurt Lundvold, who however died barely 3 years after the wedding. In the 1960s, her career stagnated and she disappeared from the film world, except for a small role in Rainer Werner Fassbinder's film The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant. In 1999, she was one of the interviewees in the documentary Hitler's Women, in what was her last appearance on the big screen. Lída Baarová died in 2000 in Salzburg at age 85. An anecdote about propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. When it came time towards war's end, when he thought it appropriate to burn all his private documents, his aide von Oven would remember that the minister was looking at a collection of old photographs. He suddenly stopped at one and showed the young man the portrait of a woman. "Look," he said, "this is a beautiful woman." Von Oven looked at the photograph. It was of Lída Baarová. Goebbels stared at the face in the photograph for a few moments and then tore the photo with his hands. "To the fire with her," he said. During World War II, thousands of children were born in Belgium due to relationships between Wehrmacht soldiers and local women. They were called war children, in the literal sense of the term, because their parents would not have met had it not been for the war. Most children born during the war were conceived within voluntary relationships, if not real loves. Unlike World War I, when German troops terrorized the civilian population, the Wehrmacht had strict orders to behave courteously towards women. Rapes were rare and even punished. During the war, German soldiers were not allowed to marry women from occupied countries with whom they had affairs. Therefore, the companions, prevented from becoming legitimate wives, found themselves alone, often pregnant, in the midst of shame and social isolation. Some chose to abandon their secret children in orphanages or put them up for adoption, hoping to regain normal existence and perhaps hoping for a life away from social stigma for their children. Others decided to keep them, despite difficulties and sufferings that were not spared, and despite their capacity to sustain their children continuously being questioned. During childhood, mothers tended not to tell their children about their German ancestry. Answering the questions which children often asked, also driven by curiosity or malice of their peers, meant renewing the sense of shame and admitting faults they didn't have. Most of them only discovered their paternal origins at an older age. Some managed to meet their fathers, while others didn't even have the chance to meet their biological mothers. Historical research in the Netherlands states that over 140,000 girls and women came into contact with the German occupier between 1940 and 1945. It's estimated that between 13,000 and 15,000 children were born from these relationships. Children whose existences were defined by a conflict they scarcely witnessed became targets of harassment, rejection, and social exclusion. Being illegitimate at that time carried bureaucratic complications that made even securing employment and earning a livelihood challenging. For their mothers, derogatorily labelled Moffenmaiden, German girls, the liberation of German-occupied territory brought little relief. Some faced trials resulting in prison sentences or house arrest, others were dispatched to labour camps alongside other traitors, while others managed to flee abroad with children born from these relationships. Monika Diederichs was born in Germany to a Dutch mother and German father. Her father had returned severely wounded from the war, having lost both eyes, so the family spent those early years with her paternal grandparents in Germany. In 1947, Monika's father Alois died while still very young, prompting Monika and her mother to return to the Netherlands. The journey took 3 days, crossing war-torn and bombed-out Germany to reach her mother's country. However, upon reaching the border, new problems emerged due to Monika's German paternity, which was unwelcome in the Netherlands. Despite this, mother and daughter managed to cross legally and reached Amsterdam. There, Monika's mother remarried a Dutchman and closed the chapter on her past. For several years, Monika spent vacations with her grandparents and paternal aunt, until her past became too heavy for a girl. Despite enormous efforts concealing her German origins, she endured bullying at school and increasingly insistent questions about her father. Monika had no choice but resign herself to silence, preserving her mental well-being and serenity. In 2006, she published the book Anyone Being Shaved Must Keep Still, an investigation into women who had romantic relationships with Germans during the war and children born from those relationships. In 2012, she wrote her autobiography, Memories of a German Girl, discussing the discrimination and social rejection she fought throughout her life in the Netherlands. Diederich's testimony joins those of other children of the enemy. Dramatic and emotionally charged stories finally emerge from oblivion, and a picture different from common imagination of the time appears. The cruel and murderous German disappears, and a friendly, kind, and seductive enemy takes his place. In these book stories, we recognize many children of enemies and even lost loves, forbidden love stories hindered by families and marginalized by society resurface with new dignity. The question Diederichs poses to readers is, why are the children of enemies considered co-culprits of the war? Gerlinde Swillen, a Francophone citizen and daughter of a Flemish mother and German soldier, intensified her search for truth in 2007 when her elderly mother revealed her biological father's name, Karl. In her autobiographical book, The Cuckoo Child, Begotten by the Enemy, 1940 to 1945, the author recounts how her grandparents were frightened by the fact that their granddaughter was a German's daughter. Indeed, her maternal grandparents were from Leuven and had lived through the First World War firsthand, with cities devastated by occupiers. They had witnessed how children of women raped by enemies were treated, and were terribly worried about their daughter's and her baby's future. The book collects stories of about 70 Belgian war children who for the first time tell their lives and the marginalization they suffered. It also emerges that many idealized their biological fathers, hoping they would rescue them from the hell they lived in, a hope often dashed. The underlying question here is, did Belgian women see Germans as occupiers and enemies? From Swillen's interviews, it seems not. Rather, on the contrary, perhaps with a bit of naivety, they simply perceived them as young and handsome men, charming in their uniforms and courteous, unlike Belgians who tended to be rougher and less generous. Annie-Fried Lyngstad, or Frida, was born on November 15, 1945, 6 months after World War II ended. When Third Reich forces capitulated across Europe and their troops fled Norway after 5 years of occupation, Sinni Lyngstad was left alone with her mother. She was single, 3 months pregnant, and beginning to endure contempt from the entire village of Ballangen. To neighbours, Sinni and thousands of other Norwegian girls were considered prostitutes and traitors to the nation, but she had only fallen in love with Alfred Haas, a Wehrmacht soldier, when she was 16 years old. Now that the war was over, she carried the fruit of a reproduction program for improving the Aryan race known as Lebensborn. This program was created by Schutzstaffel, SS leader Heinrich Himmler, to biologically expand Nazi ideology, encouraging soldiers to have Aryan children with racially fit women not only in Germany but also in occupied territories like the Norwegian village of Bjørkåsen, where Sinni Lyngstad's daughter was born. Her mother, plunged into absolute poverty and repudiated in her own country, baptized her as Annie-Fried Lyngstad, but she later became known as Frida, the ABBA singer. Annie-Fried Lyngstad's mother suffered an ordeal lasting at least 2 years. In the village, rumours circulated that she had gotten pregnant in exchange for a bag of potatoes, but she truly loved Haas, a young and handsome German soldier who suddenly disappeared at war's end and of whom she never heard again. After capitulation, post-war hatred towards descendants of German soldiers was so great that Norwegian government psychologists responsible for reporting on the children and their single mothers concluded that women who fraternized with Germans were of limited talent and social psychopaths, some of them seriously backward. Just like Frida, at least 12,000 children were born in Norway under the Lebensborn plan, but the program was cut short with the Nazis' fall. Beyond the fact that thousands were interned in psychiatric institutions, most were expelled from the country, with their families decimated and accused of having begotten future monsters who could resurrect Nazism. After 2 years of siege and discrimination, Sinni Lyngstad, her mother Antina, and little Frida, or the German bastard, as she was called in the village, emigrated to Sweden to start a new life far from the indelible stigma of the Lebensborn program. Settled near Stockholm, Frida's mother died a few months later, partly from kidney failure, but mostly from the sadness of having to raise a child alone without resources or state support. Frida was left in the care of her grandmother Antine, a seamstress and promoter of the girl's meteoric artistic career. Frida had a broad solo career that began before ABBA and continued long after the Swedish group disbanded. In Stockholm, her grandmother did everything possible to see her granddaughter happy and supported her dream of being a singer. With her meagre seamstress income, she managed to buy a piano in installments to continue developing the girl's musical talent, acclaimed in all venues where she performed. When Frida was 16 years old, everything seemed on track. The past was far behind, her voice was enchanting, and the way she moved on stage without any shyness opened doors to TV musical contests and record labels like EMI. Frida believed her father had died in a shipwreck and had never heard of the Nazi reproduction program Lebensborn until during the early days of her relationship with Benny Andersson, and ABBA's success when a German fan revealed a disturbing revelation: her father was alive. The former soldier was married and had 2 other children. It was then that Andersson arranged a meeting between Frida and her father, Alfred Haas, the former Nazi soldier who now worked as a pastry chef. Annie-Fried was shocked to learn her father was alive and that she would see him for the first time. The meeting, however, was cold and somewhat overacted. Frida was famous, and magazines wanted to tell everything in great detail, like the Dutch magazine Pop or German Bravo, which had given the scoop telling the true story of the dark-haired ABBA singer. However, over time the meeting proved to be a setup, and Frida fell into deep depression. She had 2 children from her first marriage who kept her afloat, but her relationship with Benny Andersson, her second partner, was failing. She met her biological father a few more times, then never saw him again. "I can't love him, as if he had been with us while I was growing up," Frida said. Her father died on February 23, 2009. Frida struggled to leave behind her painful past and has never spoken about it again. In 1981, she divorced Benny Andersson and married Prince Heinrich Russo-Reuss von Plauen, a member of the German royal family. Her marriage to Prince Reuss opened the doors of the Swedish royal court. Since then, the Norwegian girl conceived under a Nazi experiment to create a superior race, an orphan who suffered exile and rejection from her village, now holds the title of Her Serene Highness Princess Annifried of Reuss, Countess of Plauen. German soldiers were subjected to strict discipline, as Nazism also wanted to control their intimate lives. Condoms were distributed as a method of preventing sexually transmitted diseases, and the regime established brothels in occupied countries to satisfy soldiers' sexual needs. However, this wasn't enough. In fact, many relationships with local women were born as a kind of rebellion by young soldiers. The war also triggered this new need to seek refuge in more intense feelings, imbued with tenderness, to escape the horrors and destruction experienced every day. In Norway, the belief that German children suffered from mental disorders existed for a long time. The famous psychiatrist Ernulf Ødegaard, who treated women who fraternized with the German enemy during Norway's occupation, quantified that between 50% and 60% of children born to 35 Norwegian mothers and German fathers were diagnosed with cognitive problems, especially due to prejudice and aversion against the German enemy. Many war children were interned in psychiatric institutions, treated as incapable of understanding and abandoned to their fate. In Amsterdam, special hospitals existed where German lovers could give birth on the condition they joined the National Socialist Women's Association. According to Nazi ideology, children of Belgian and Dutch women could be good Aryans. These women were permitted to choose between surrendering their children for adoption or keeping them. In Eastern Europe, women had no choice. It was the Nazis who made the decision. If the German soldier's child possessed enough Aryan characteristics, they could keep it. If not considered suitable, it was given up for adoption. In Dutch hospitals, women who loved a German didn't always receive good treatment. For example, it happened that above the bed of one of these girls there was a sign stating, "It is mandatory to wash your hands after caring for the pregnant woman." Only a few men married Dutch lovers, and many women remained single mothers. Those who could keep their children with them often returned to their country of origin, working hard through sacrifices and privations to feed those desired and unfortunate children and allow them a dignified life. Sint Hubertus in Amsterdam was an institution that sheltered single mothers and their German children. After the war, this association took a clear stance on the inclusion of children of German soldiers. They could only be accepted if their status was kept secret and if the German name was converted to Dutch. In her research, Monica Diederichs found many examples of name changes for forbidden children. In many cases, even when a father wanted to recognize his child, he was not allowed to register it with his paternal surname. Children of the enemy were seen as forbidden children, uncomfortable witnesses to a phenomenon that wanted to be erased from national memory. As illegitimate children, they could not enjoy the same rights as children born within marriage, but not even within the same families did they receive equal treatment. Children of shame grew up in pain, in denial of their roots, often unloved by their own mothers, frequently humiliated in public, discriminated against, and isolated. A journalist recounts the dramatic testimony of one of them, Dr., who spent his childhood in constant shame for faults that were not his. His maternal grandmother, in fact, detested that Nazi son who dishonored her and the whole family, and repeatedly punished him with painful and humiliating practices. provoking the laughter of the whole community that continuously insulted and mocked him. In Germany, before the enactment of the 1969 law on the legal status of children born out of wedlock, illegitimate children were entirely excluded from the father's natural inheritance, as they were not considered his descendants. After the law came into force in 1970, this right was recognized for natural children, but not for those born before 1949, who were already 21 years old at the time the law came into force. This inheritance right is often why biological relatives refused to meet the children of war. On the one hand, relatives feared they would claim inheritance rights, and on the other hand, the children only wanted to be recognized as such and reclaim their denied origins and identity. Many years after World War II ended, children of shame decided to reveal their identities, began telling their stories, and searched for that German father they had often never known. This is the case of Delorme Hoffmann, who in 2005, after the publication in Le Figaro of Jean-Paul Picaper's book Cursed Children, founded the Association Cœurs Sans Frontières in France. The association, which has about 200 members, brings together all children born to French mothers and German soldiers, offering concrete help to rediscover their origins and obtain dual citizenship from the National Assembly, or the Bundestag. The reference point for this research is the German office in Berlin, an archive created in 1939 that contains all the files of German soldiers involved in various capacities in World War II. Each year, the service handles around 500 requests from children of war seeking their German origins. The association's secretary, Chantal de Gantrec, is herself a child of shame. "Without roots, it's like living halfway," she said in an interview. "I finally got to tell my story, but I already lived my life. I did it too late. But even if it's too late for us, we're here to help others, those being born now. We're here so they don't feel alone, so they don't have to suffer what we suffered. A childhood without love is an abyss of loneliness that takes years to get out of." The object of elimination from collective memory of post-war Europe was the love stories between German soldiers and women from occupied countries. In fact, the dominant rhetoric at the conflict's end prescribed women to return to their family roles and procreative and maternal duties. Many of the facts involving women prosecuted for collaboration relate to romantic and sexual relationships, which are intimately intertwined with wartime events. During the liberation, women were punished for not conforming to the dominant model demanding loyalty to the nation, their husbands and boyfriends. Sexual relations with the enemy were not only judged as betrayals, but demonstrated enjoyment of autonomous and independent freedom and sexuality that was impossible to leave unpunished. For having betrayed the nation, women were shaved in public, so their guilt would be immediately visible, stripped, beaten, insulted, subjected to mockery and humiliation, while the sad spectacle was experienced by the population as if it were a party. Among the various motivations that pushed women into the arms and beds of the enemies during the war, the simplest and most banal has been attempted to be eliminated and erased: love. Some relationships between German soldiers and local women were love relationships: reckless, naive, superficial, wrong, immature, dangerous, dramatic, long or fleeting. These love stories have been forgotten by chronicles and historiography, just as the children of shame born from these relationships have been attempted to be forgotten. For those children, childhood was often dramatic, with strong psychological repercussions that continued into adulthood. Some were abandoned in orphanages and institutions, others lived in families that continued to see in them the ignominious mark of shame and illegitimacy. Some mothers found themselves raising their children alone amid 1,000 difficulties, amid distrust and scorn for having been enemy lovers and traitors to the homeland. Despite the attempt to erase this dark page of the liberation from national memory, the stories of witnesses who were children of war have begun to emerge and reclaim their identity, freeing themselves from the shame and guilt they never had. A complex and diversified phenomenon that spread throughout Europe during World War II, with markedly misogynistic roots that push us, also in light of the new social